Hello, everyone. Now I'm talking to you officially for Nerd Nite. How wonderful to have a full room of people and slides again, folks. It's a really exciting night. So thank you for coming out. Thank you to Venue for hosting us. I will say, if you are looking at other people's drinks or food and thinking, gee, I really should have gotten one, my feelings will not be hurt. Go stand up, go to the bar, order your food and drink. If you come to Nerd Nite in the past or you come to Nerd Nite in the future, you'll pretty much hear what I'm saying again. So you aren't missing out. Go get your refreshments. But if you are wondering about Nerd Nite, if you've never been here before, you say, what the heck is this and how did it start? Like most good things, there is an origin story. It all began with this guy, Chris. Chris was in Boston in the mid-2000s getting his PhD. It looks like from the picture that he was getting his PhD in beer drinking, but as folks who are in higher education know, oftentimes that goes along with getting your higher degrees. And so Chris, he had his go-to place. It was the Midway Bar, and he would go there all the time. It was like his second home. But every year, Chris was studying evolutionary biology, and he would go on a research trip to Cameroon. So he'd go and spend a month or two in Africa every year studying the indigo bird. Look at this bird. Isn't it a little sweetie? It looks so nice and so cute. But I hate to break it to y'all. The indigo bird, it's not a nice bird. It's a jerk bird. Because here's what happens. Mama indigo bird, when it's time for her to lay eggs, she goes and she finds another mama bird's nest and lays an egg there. Now, this is actually relatively common with many types of birds, where they will leave a nest and then all the baby birds are born and mama bird who was sitting on the eggs will raise them all and they'll all happily go on into the world. But the indigo bird is a jerk bird. And so instead, when the baby indigo bird is born, it savagely gets rid of all of the other eggs. And mama bird, not super smart, mama bird just raises the one little indigo bird on its own to go on and look like this nice bird, but then act like this jerk bird. So this is what Chris studied every year. And then he would come back and he'd take a seat at Midway and he'd be finally getting to see all his friends who he missed in the months that he was in Africa. And they'd come one at a time and they'd sit by the bar and say, all right, Chris, what were you up to? And Chris would tell this story about the jerk bird. And it's a good story. And Chris told it a lot. He got really, really good at telling this story. And the bar staff got really, really tired of hearing this story. And finally they said, all right, Chris, enough is enough. We cannot hear about this jerk bird anymore. So you get one more night. Invite all of your friends out. We're going to give you a microphone and you get to tell this story one last time. And so Chris, why wouldn't you say yes to that? Said yes to it and invited his friends, and the bar was full, and it went really great. And that's how the idea for Nerd Nite happened. But then Chris talked to his friend named Matt. This is Matt. Matt is Nerd Nite's big boss. He is the person who makes sure that Nerd Nite still happens. Matt hosted a trivia night in Brooklyn, and Chris kept saying, hey, man, everyone does a trivia night. You should do a Nerd Nite. And Matt listened to him and did it. And Nerd Nites spread across the world, literally across the world. For example, so tonight, here we are in Ann Arbor. Also tonight, there's one in Nashville. But then later this week, there's one in Orlando. There's one in London. There's one in Tokyo. These happen everywhere. And it is all because of Chris and his annoying story about the jerk bird. But we're really, really grateful for him because we get to then tell the story of the jerk bird every month, but even more importantly, we get to hear all of your wonderful things that you are nerdy about. Nerdy could be what you study. So Chris studied evolutionary biology. He has a PhD in it. He's an expert. Nerdy could also be that Wikipedia page that you have read 25 times and you notice when there's a new edit and you care so much about it. That counts too. So we have a wonderful mix of that. So first of all, I just want to say a huge thank you. I'm Emily and my friend Sarah at the back. We're both with the Ann Arbor District Library. That's who brings this to you. We're real fans of the library. One of the nice things, we are actually one of the few Nerd Nites that don't have a cover charge. And that's because the library does not like to charge for things. So we're so glad to be here. We're also so glad for Venue for letting us be here. So thank you for supporting Venue and buying those drinks and food. Please feel free to keep doing so. The nice thing about Nerd Nite, very casual vibe. So while I do ask that you listen to our speakers, none of them are going to be hurt if you get up and go get another drink because they know it's just going to make you enjoy their talks all the more. So let's talk about those talks because this is enough of me at the front of the room. We have a wonderful trio of speakers tonight. We have Jennifer German, who's going to talk about NASA's international space partners. Justin Schell, who's going to talk about racial covenants and deeds of injustice. And Nancy Wayne, who's going to talk about the sex life of hermaphroditic sea slugs. What a lineup we have. So I am thrilled to welcome our first speaker. Jennifer German is a NASA JPL Space Ambassador, which is about the coolest title that exists out there, and also a general, very knowledgeable person about space and space enthusiasts. So let's give Jennifer a hand.
Oh, the pointer doesn't work.
Pointer doesn't work. Check this forward.
Yay! Oh, sorry, I forgot we're streaming. Bummer. All right, I got one too few hands. Anyway, so yes, my name is Jennifer German. I am a NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador. It's okay. So basically, I and my a bunch of solar system ambassadors all over the place. There's like a dozen in Michigan, 7 in Southeast Michigan alone. And just to make it more confusing, the other solar system ambassador who lives and works in Ann Arbor is also named Jennifer. So just, it is a good name. Yes, absolutely. Hey, thank you. That helps. Okay. And I'm supposed to say that we're all volunteers. So they make me say that, whatever. All right, let's move on. NASA, partner space agencies. So what I call the big 5 are those space agencies who are part of the International Space Station and help it operate, built it, run it, etc. So they are NASA, CSA, which is the Canadian Space Agency, or ASC in French, JAXA, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency. I didn't do it. Roscosmos, which is the Russian Federation State Space Corporation, but in Russian, not in English. And ESA, which is the European Space Agency. Oh, and of course, because, you know, this is how the world works. So CSA introduced a new logo less than a month ago. Let's see, March 16th to be specific. And that was, of course, after I ordered all the stickers for you all. So sorry, but your stickers are the older but well-known logo, and I will be using this for the rest of the presentation. Okay. In the last 10 years, 3 other space agencies have risen to the national stage, and they are, and I'm going to get this right, ISRO, which is the Indian Space Research Organization, UAE Space Agency, which is United Arab Emirates Space Agency, and KARI, which is the Korea Aerospace Research Institute in South Korea. That matters to some people. So, of NASA's 7 partner agencies, which makes 8, there's only one partner that is able to launch humans into space, and that's Roscosmos, Russia, of course. There are only 3 countries that are capable of launching humans into outer space right now. Roscosmos from Russia, NASA, USA, and CNSA from China. Now, you might have noticed, CNSA wasn't on any of the previous slides, right? And that is because they're not part of the International Space Station. And to the best of my knowledge, they've only ever done one very little project partner with NASA. So they're not really a NASA partner. Anyway, let's see. Each of these 3 space agencies, of course, have their own names for what they call the humans they send into space, right? So in the English version of Russian, it's cosmonaut, cosmos. We know what the cosmos is. English, we call them astronauts. Astro, whether it comes from Greek or Latin, and the roots were astrum and astron. And I don't know which is which, but they both mean star either way. So astro for star. And then the rough translation from Chinese to English becomes, I'm going to get this right too, taikonaut, where taiko either stands for space or cosmos. Again, it's a rough translation, so it's not a precise thing, but taikonaut is how we would pronounce their word. Okay. So we have 3 nations that can send humans into space. Wow, it got really quiet. Wow, you're all listening. This is nice. Thanks. Okay, so there are actually, though, 44 nations that have trained humans to be astronauts, cosmonauts, taikonauts. And they all get sent up by one of those 3. All right? So I'm not going to go over all 44 because we'd just be sitting here listening to words, which I guess you're doing anyway. But there are dozens of space agencies around the Earth today. Some of them have formed larger space agencies, like ESA. So there's a lot of agencies in Europe that have gotten together. They formed ESA. Roscosmos, since the fall of the USSR, the various nations that are independent, some of them still have partnered with the Russian Federation for Roscosmos. And then UAE, of course, the United Arab Emirates, like it's in the name. So I am going to mention a few individual ones, though, because we have 7 that have trained more than 5 humans that have gone into space. So, of course, Russia, Roscosmos, both under Russia now and when it was the USSR. NASA for United States. China has however many they have. It's a lot. Japan is in the dozen. So then we have Germany, and this DLSR stands for the Germany Center for Air and Space Travel, but of course in German. D is for Deutsch, which is German and German. And CNES, which is the National Center for Space Studies in France, but in French, Centre National d'Études Spatiales. I think I did that right. And then CSA again. That's our old buddy to the north. 9 other nations have only trained 2 astronauts. So I don't know why there's a gap, like either you've trained 2 or less or 5 or more, but that just seems to be the thing. But yeah, so their names are here. And then the other 28 have only trained 1. And Brazil gets called out special because it was the first country from the southern hemisphere to have an astronaut, taikonaut, cosmonaut. All right, but so what I'm talking about, the partners and space agencies that we're watching, I mention India and the UAE because, well, actually, I'll tell you why in a few slides here. You'll see why. Thank you. All right, so we have 3 space agencies that can launch humans into space. Y'all remember, right? I have to go back. Okay, good. We've got 3 more that have trained a significant number of cosmonauts, astronauts, or taikonauts. And there are 3 more that have made a big name for themselves. So that's 9 space agencies. And now I'm going to group those 9 in different ways. So instead of launching humans, we're going to talk about now launching spacecraft that are over 1 ton in weight into space. And in order of their reaching outer space, Roscosmos, USA, ESA, CNSA, JAXA, ISRO. Although when we talk about ESA, it didn't work. There it goes. It's actually only France is the only country in Europe, the only space partner as part of ESA that can launch large craft over 1 ton into outer space. And so the French spaceport is actually in French Guiana, which isn't even in France, but it's owned by France. So, okay, we'll let it go. This past June, so actually, last year, 2022 June, South Korea became the 7th nation to successfully launch a craft over 1 ton into outer space, which is why I say CARI is one of the 3 rising agencies to watch, because that's a pretty big deal. All right. So I keep talking about over 1 ton, over 1 ton. Case in point about being over 1 ton. We say that because lots of things can launch little satellites. Like we know private companies and the corporate stations have been launching, the names of some of them. Those are the satellites for our GPS signals and the international internet and there's something else I forget. The cell phones, right. So that's why we say over 1 ton, because you have to be able to get away from Earth to be on that list. And so these are 6 space agencies that have successfully gotten away from Earth and put a spacecraft in the orbit of the moon or have landed on the moon. And in order, because I like doing things in the order that chronological order that they reached it. Roscosmos, so yes, they beat us to the moon, but only with a machine, not with a man. NASA, JAXA, ESA, CNSA, and ISRO. So that's why another one that we should be watching. They're on the moon. That wasn't mine, right? No, okay. Then we have a different 6 that have successfully put spacecraft in orbit of Mars or landed on Mars. And in their order of reaching Mars, it's a different 6. We have NASA, we made it there first. Roscosmos, ESA, ISRO, UAE, and CNSA. So again, this is why UAE is something to watch. They have successfully got 1 mission to Mars. I only just found that out last year, so hey. And the UAE, if you notice, they skipped the moon. They just went right to Mars. They were like, see ya, that's small potatoes, right? But as I was practicing this presentation, I realized something. So we talked about the 7 that can put large craft into space, right? And UAE isn't on this list anywhere. And I was like, wait a minute. How did they get to Mars if they can't get off of Earth? So I did a little research. It turns out JAXA launched the spacecraft for them. And once it was in Earth orbit, that's when UAE took over and had it propel itself out to Mars. So depends on how you want to think about it. JAXA's not on this list, though. They have tried to reach Mars once. It did not succeed. But that's okay, because they've been doing a lot of other things. All right, so Mars is the current solar system hot spot to be, right? Everybody knows Mars, Mars, Mars. There are other planets, of course. Only 4 space agencies have put a spacecraft in orbit of Venus or Mercury or have landed on Venus or Mercury. And yes, Roscosmos released images of Venus's surface. You should go see them. They're actually kind of amazing. Before the environment of Venus just kind of ate the spacecraft and it died a very dismal death, as they all do once they get down that far. But anyway, so in order, NASA, Roscosmos, ESA, and JAXA. And then we have asteroids and comets. Did that work? Yes. Which humanity has been interested in asteroid and comets for a very, very long time. Well, 4 of us have put a spacecraft in orbit of a comet or an asteroid or landed on an asteroid. NASA, Roscosmos, JAXA, and ESA. Same 4, different order, which is fine. But what's really cool, at least I think so, is that 2 of these agencies have successfully returned a sample from a comet or an asteroid. That being NASA for comet and JAXA for asteroid. They landed on it, they collected a sample, they came back twice. All right, so they've been busy. They don't need Mars. Okay, and we're almost done here. So what about the rest of the planets? Jupiter and Saturn. We've been to, remember Cassini not that long ago, and there's been Galileo to Jupiter, and Cassini was to Saturn, yeah. So NASA and ESA, only 2 that have been to those. And yet further out we go, we've got Neptune and Uranus, and see, even the technology agrees, none, nobody. Can my tech guy look up, please? Oh yeah, it's back, okay. No one's been there. NASA, the Voyager, of course, flew by once, took some pictures. That's been it. No one's been back. I'm trying to, come on, people. Anyways. All right. So that's about all I've got because I only got 15 minutes. All right, so they're telling me I got some time for questions. Oh, comment. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes, he said nerdiest thing he could think of, comment. And I'm going to repeat it because it is. So the French Guianas, the France spaceport, because they're in the Newfoundland time zone, they're actually on the half-hour time as opposed to the hour with most of the rest of the world. Yes. Thank you so much, because I was saying ESA instead of ESA until about 15 months ago. So one more time, it's ISRO. I will say that from now on. So strike all that from before. It's ISRO. Okay, good. Thank you. And you asked, what does a solar system ambassador do? What's our job? So our job is just to bring what NASA is doing in outer space and any news from that to the public, into our communities. NASA, broadcasts in the media and everything, but sometimes the media thinks other things are more important. So we set up, yeah, thanks. Yeah. So we set up presentations, we go into schools, we go to libraries, we go into venues such as this venue, and yeah, just to bring the news of what's going on to our communities, to the people. Well, okay, lots of questions. All right, Oh. Okay. Yes. So she's saying that, yes, space is vast, but haven't we, as in Elon Musk and William Shatner, and there were other people, haven't they gone to space? I was saying the astronauts can only be launched by NASA and Roscosmos and CNSA. Yes. And this is where we get into technicalities. So there's differences between suborbital flight, which is still considered being in outer space, versus getting up to where the International Space Station is, versus getting way the frick out. There's oh shoot, somebody saved my poor memory. What's the line called? The what? Huh? No. I mean, yes. No, there's a, yeah, the line that most people consider this is now outer space and no longer Earth. It starts with a K, and I can't. Yes. Thank you. The Kármán line. Hey, give him a sticker. He's earned a sticker. Yeah. Oh, okay. So yes. So there's 3 agencies now, and then of course The Russians have done it also for space tourism, in a sense, if you have billions of dollars or millions of dollars and can pay that fee, but whatever. Yes, so the numbers of legit astronauts are climbing well out of the 500s of what the nations have trained for. But those, you're getting a ride into space, you're coming back down, right? You're not trained, you're not running the ship, you're not flying the thing, you're not performing a mission, you're not doing research. I'm sorry, you were the one talking and I'm done. Yes. You do have to have, you have to take like a 4-hour training session or something, whatever it is. But yeah, I know, right? But no, you sit in the seat the whole time. I think one of them might let you unbuckle for a moment in microgravity. No, you don't get to do a flip. Sorry, no. To see the Earth and to feel that moment of what, yeah, I know. She's saying, why go then if you can't do a flip? All right, I have so run over my time, but you said 2 questions.
Some of the work that North Korea is doing, granted, probably not trying to go to space, but are those rockets of that size? Trying to grasp.
All right, so he's trying to grasp, what's the 1 ton? How much is that? And the rockets that North Korea is using that apparently we have been worried about what's actually on them because we don't know. Are they big enough to be in the category of these other 7? Not yet. The last one that they tried to get up something really big with, kind of, what do we call it? Rapid something dissembly. It means it blew up. But yeah, so not yet. Doesn't mean they won't. All right.
So the good news, yeah, first of all, wonderful, yay. But clearly, y'all have not had your fill of Jennifer, and I have some really good news for you because she is coming. Thank you. She's coming to the library to do a talk, just her. So that means you get a whole hour of Jennifer, which also means more time for questions on May 4th at 6:30 at the downtown library. So this was just a little taste, and you can get more and get your questions answered. Also, I bet if you came up to her during a break, she might also be willing to answer a question for you. Speaking of, let's take a quick break. You can pick up some of those stickers in the back, refresh your drink, use the bathroom. They're through this door here. And we're going to come back here at 7:47. So you got a little more than 10 minutes. And we'll see you back here. Okay, friends, we are back. Don't make me do the kindergarten teacher thing. I will do it. Everybody get your bunny ears up. So my name is Sarah. I am at the Ann Arbor District Library along with Emily. It is our pleasure to organize Nerd Nite and to have so many of you guys out here. Thank you so much for joining us. And another big thanks to Venue for hosting us. And then it will be my pleasure to introduce Justin Schell. Justin is the Director of Scholarly Technology and Creative Spaces at the University of Michigan Library. And he's going to talk to us, yes, right? He's going to talk to us about Justice Indeed, an initiative addressing racially restricted housing covenants. And the next most important thing that I would like to do is to give a shout out and a thank you to, I think, the only 2 people watching on the live stream. Perhaps the most important people, though, Justin's mom and dad.
Gotta love moms and dads. And now, welcome Justin Schell.
Thanks so much. I await the text message from my parents at any moment. So thank you all for coming here tonight. Oh, I also, as a former sort of active camera operator, there are 2 cameras, so don't worry about ducking under them as you go by them. Don't feel nervous about that. Just do it. So I'm going to talk to you about a project we're working on called Justice Indeed, which is about racially restrictive covenants. These are documents that were placed in, well, actually, let's just take a look at a few. This is the best way to get started on what these are and how they were used. Maybe. There we go. So a quick content warning, there is racist language in these. So do what you need to do to take care of yourself during this presentation. So a racially restrictive covenant, we're going to look at some examples from the ones we found in Washtenaw County so far in our initial work. Small type, I'm sorry, but we're going to highlight some things here. So what these documents were, these were clauses in property records, often in deeds. Other times they were sort of organizations or subdivisions that put these clauses into property records that said, if you were a person of color, if you were a Jew, you could not live here. You could not live in this community. You could not live on this property. And so sometimes, we've seen these across Washtenaw County. We've seen them with a variety of different language. And so I'm going to highlight some of the language here. So sometimes this was, these lots should not be used nor sold to people not of the Caucasian race. No persons or any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race. So as long as you were a domestic servant, you could live there. Other ones said this could not be used by a colored person or persons for any purpose. And you also see that sometimes they had manufacturing purposes. Sometimes they said no farm animals, no slaughterhouses. And so there's also a level of sort of dehumanization that came in with these covenants too. We would also see some of these that said occupied by persons of African descent, commonly known as colored people. And some of these, we see these in Pittsfield Township, Ann Arbor, Pittsfield Township again. This one in Dexter, persons of African or Jewish descent, nor aliens excepting such as are descended from the English-speaking race. So there's a lot of really, weird and terrible race science going on here, but they all sought to exclude non-white people from these neighborhoods, from these properties in an active way. And this one comes from West Willow, which is the planned community that was built next to the Willow Run bomber plant. And so this one has one of the more sort of complex covenants. And this was in the early 1940s. So there's not entirely of the white or Caucasian race. You can be a servant and live there, but also they have this element of, for the purpose of this paragraph, no person of Japanese, Chinese, Mexican, Hindu, Philippine, Ethiopian, Indian, or Mongolian race shall be deemed to be Caucasian. So they have a sense that whiteness is constructed, that in some ways they might be determined as white somewhere, but they still want to exclude them. And now, Westville is a predominantly black neighborhood. But there are also multiple units in it, and this was the only one that had this kind of covenant on it. And so again, where have we found these so far? This is a map of the county. And so we found these across all the major cities and towns and villages across here. And this is just through some very, very preliminary research with records from a title company. And we're going to zoom in here to Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. And wherever you see a color other than gray, that's where we found some kind of covenant. As I mentioned, some of these covenants are for an individual property. Sometimes they were put on at the early stage by a developer. Sometimes they're put on by a homeowner. We'll take questions at the end. Thanks. Other times, what I think is some of the more noxious ones, they were put together by people who lived there after the community was founded and said, we want to kick out all the people of color in this neighborhood. And so we're going to band together to restrict this neighborhood and then force people out. So one of these, we're looking at a story within the Ainsworth Park neighborhood where someone sued and said, you family, a black family needs to move out. You need to show cause why you can stay here. And a judge sided with the white homeowners who said they needed to leave. And so we have this long history of this happening here. Again, we think of Ann Arbor especially as a very progressive, city, but there is this history here as well. There's a documentary about this in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota called Jim Crow of the North. And this is how we didn't have whites only signs or colored water fountains and things like that. But this is a very, very similar version of that. It was just hidden a little bit better. So we see these on, again, individual lots. We see them on, subdivisions sometimes. In working with other covenant projects around the country, we even see them in cemetery plots and grave sites where someone says, I don't want to be buried next to anyone who is not white. It's like racism in the afterlife. So we don't know if we're going to find those here. I suspect we will, because we found them in every other community, but we'll see. But that's just the literal depth that these go. So this was not the only thing that contributed to things like housing inequality and structural racism. People know what this map is. This is a redlining map from the Homeowners Lending Corporation. This is from Detroit. Ann Arbor wasn't big enough to get a Homeowners Lending Corporation map. So the red areas are the ones that were deemed not suitable for lending. And that's where the term redlining came from. And so there was, you could not get a federally guaranteed mortgage in many of those areas. And many of those areas were either predominantly black or mixed. And so you had this very noxious toolbox of, redlining, racial covenants. You had, before a Supreme Court ruling in the late teens, you had cities and counties that were trying to do racial zoning that said, oh, you only, these neighborhoods were zoned for white people only. You also had outright intimidation and violence by white people. If all of the other things failed, you still had that option too. And again, you see these all over the country. We're involved with a national covenants coalition that is basically in every state in the lower 48. These tools are being used. And so thinking about this, we were talking before, a couple of us, about, this was just sort of the way things were done back then. It's like, well, sort of, but also there were lots of people challenging this too. There were multiple court cases that came to the Supreme Court, many of them led by the NAACP and Thurgood Marshall, that said these are really terrible things and they are illegal. They're a violation of the Constitution. And there were local cases that I mentioned, one of the ones in Ainsworth Park, but there are other ones as well that went to the Michigan Supreme Court that they did side and saying these covenants were illegal, or that there wasn't a way that they could see saying they were illegal until there was something from either state law or the Supreme Court or things like that. So you had this activism throughout the first half of the 20th century, trying to get this made illegal, because they knew, these, people from the NAACP and these activists and these lawyers, they knew the problems. They could see what harm these were doing to people and the chances, to build better lives for themselves. So all of that culminated in a Supreme Court ruling in 1947 called Schell versus Kramer. And if anybody knows the Orsil and Minnie McGee house in Detroit, that was one of the houses and one of the families that was part of this case. You can go visit that house. There is a historical marker on it, along with a house in DC and one in St. Louis. And that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And they said these covenants were unenforceable. That was their language, because they constituted a form of state action, because judges were ruling on these and said these were okay, and that violated the Constitution. Now, what's interesting is even in some of the documents we've seen, this is 1947, we still see covenants being used into the 50s. Like, well, they're unenforceable. Why are people, why are you still using them? Well, they didn't think the decision would last. They thought it'd be overturned. And so we're going to keep doing this because it's not going to stick. They were eventually made illegal by the Fair Housing Act in the 60s. So why are we still talking about these? They're rendered unenforceable. They were rendered illegal. You cannot put one of these on a property today. But we still see the effects of these today. The stark gaps in racial home ownership and value of those homes. Housing as a source of generational wealth. And we see that stark difference in generational wealth along racial lines. We see zip codes as predictors of health in so many places. Many other public services like education are often tied to where you live and what kind of housing value is in a community. But also it illuminates structural racism in a way that is very personal. And it is not this sort of like thing that allowed, people to get houses, but not those people. That cleared this land for only certain groups of people to live there. And so it makes this, in a much more personal way, able to be seen and to see the effects. So that's why we usually start with that language and to really just think about what that means. And then, think about what it would be like to find one of those on your property that you might have. And some of you might, and we'll talk about what you can do if you have those. So this is where Justice Indeed comes in. So we are a community-partnered collaborative project comprised of a bunch of folks from the University of Michigan. One of my colleagues, Nina, is here tonight. Thank you for coming out, Nina. And so we're in partnership with a number of different community members, organizations throughout Washtenaw County. This includes folks from the NAACP, people from the African American Cultural History Museum, different pastors, activists, community organizers, and so this project is trying to do three things. We're trying to educate about the role these covenants and other racist housing policies, because these weren't the only ones, but they played a big part in it. The role these kind of policies played in causing segregation and economic inequality. We want to repeal the covenants, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a little bit. And we want to help shape the policies to repair the damage caused by the systemic housing discrimination in Washtenaw County. And so we talk about taking action, and we usually talk about this in three ways: redact, repeal, and repair. So the first one is people try to redact these. Let's just get rid of them. We don't want to think about that anymore. So this is what those would look like. We don't want to do that. But the title company that we were working with tried to redact them from their records, but they didn't do this kind of redaction. They just did the Sharpie kind of redaction, and we could still read what it said, but it also signaled when there was a covenant. So it actually made it super easy for us to find them. So thank you. But there's a big debate in what we're trying to do with these, because we're going to get rid of all these. We want these to be gone. This is a stain on our past. We just need to be rid of these. It's like, no, we don't want to get rid of these. We need to preserve these. We need to reckon with these. We don't need to cover them up. Enough of that happens already. So this is when we talk about repealing them. And repealing them means, we have an example. Whoop. Get you trigger. Come on. Whoop. There we go. So we've worked with a couple different neighborhoods that had these subdivision-wide covenants. And one was the Hannah neighborhood, which is just on the old west side of Ann Arbor. And what they did was they put a statement in their documents saying rejecting the covenant that was in there and placing a new restriction, replacing it with a much more inclusive statement. And these restrictions can be very, can seem very commonplace, like, no billboards, setbacks only that so far and things like that. There's sort of a generic thing, and this the sort of the prosaicness of this racist language, is all the worse because it's so commonplace. And so Justice Indeed will be releasing a toolkit in the coming weeks. So if you do have one on your property or you are part of a neighborhood that has one of these, there'll be tools in there to help you repeal that. And finally, repairing. And so none of this matters if this is just an acknowledgement or if it's just, there was this bad thing in the past. We're better now. Cool. Let's move on. So we're working with the Exploratory Committee on Reparations that Washtenaw County started a couple months ago. So one of the person who's leading this is on our advisory board, and we are explicit that this is a reparations project. It is not just about making people feel better about the land that they have gotten or have come into that other people couldn't get access to 40, 50, 60 years ago. But we need your help to do this kind of project. And not just to look in your closing packets and try to figure out if these are in there, because it's kind of hard to find them. We have done a lot of searching. So what we are building in conjunction with a number of different organizations, as well as with Washtenaw County, we are building a crowdsourcing project so that Washtenaw County has supplied us with more than 300,000 property records, which we will OCR, optical character recognize, and we're going to look for terms within those documents that might be indicative of a racial covenant. And then we're going to ask you to help us go through them and find the details. So this covenant, which is right down here, is from 1945, and we have some names, where the purchasers were. We have the specific lot number, and we have the specific language of the covenant, because we want to know the specific language, because who were they afraid of? Who were the people they were trying to keep out? And then we can link the lot number, the addition, the subdivision, and we can make a map. Where were these being used over time? And we can sort of see that from our initial map, but we know that's not accurate. We know that's not accurate in terms of the volume that we know are out there. So this is not ready yet, but you can scan this QR code and you can join our mailing list, and you will get an email when this project is ready to go. This will be public for anyone to work on. We're also going to be hosting community transcription events where you can work with some of us to go through the workflow and also learn about some of the effects of these. And then you'll also get an email when that toolkit is released, so you can work on some of your own property or working with your neighbors. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to questions. Yeah. So we found them as early as around the teens. So like 1910, 1915. I think the first is like 1912. But they really pick up in the 1920s after that Supreme Court ruling outlawing racial zoning. So if we graph the ones we found, and it's like 19 teens, 1920s. And then there was another case that sort of it didn't make them illegal, but it sort of lessened it. And then they became a spike again in the 1940s. Yeah. Orsell and Minnie McGee. It's on the west. Orsell and Minnie McGee. ORSEL. And Minnie, like Minnie Mouse, MINNIE, MCGEE. It's on the west side. I don't remember the address offhand, but look up. It has its own Wikipedia page, and you can find it. Yeah.
Your title insurance policy will accept and exclude anything in your building use restrictions that refers to any racial discrimination. But I applaud the work that you're doing in preparing that.
Thank you.
Second point is the Beardwood Wall in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool place if you have a chance to go visit it. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Beerwood or Burwood Wall in Detroit was another one of these sort of horribly iconic sort of structures that was meant to keep people out of a neighborhood in Detroit. So they literally built a wall to keep people out of this neighborhood, but it doesn't go very far. It's like, it still is there, and so one half of it is on a park, and it's all been painted and decorated by members of the community. The other side of it are people's homes, so don't go over there. But it is one of those sort of symbols of, and I think it was, I am, Allie, you can help me with this, but I think that was a way they could get either the mortgage insurance, or it was something that to qualify that they had to build that wall so there wouldn't be that mixing, which would decrease the value. Yeah. How much time do I have? Okay, cool. It was in the early 1940s. We have a series of articles from the Black Ypsilanti paper, and then we just Monday got the court decision from the judge, who was like, "Yep, there's a covenant here. Yep, you are Black. You cannot live here. Sides with the plaintiff." And so we're trying to figure out now, did they move? And then what happened as a result? And so what the next steps are. So cool. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you very much, Justin. If folks, okay, good. I want to make sure the QR code's still up there. If you didn't have a chance to scan it, come on up and do so if you want. We're going to take another 5-minute break, but don't go anywhere because you don't want to miss the sex life of sea slugs. See you in a minute.
I forgot that was a break.
Be here. This is the first time that I'm giving a lecture in person since 2019. Yeah. So if I'm a little rusty, please forgive me. This all started in my book group many months ago. So I don't know if any of you are in a book group. Raise your hand. What do you normally talk about when things go off track? Sex. So with most of the books that we talk about, we meander into sex. And during the summer of 2022, I happened to mention, you can't hear me? How about that? Oh, okay, thank you. All right, this is gonna be perfect because I'm gonna be using this as a penis. So, and you will see this is perfectly aligned with where the penis is of the sea slug. So this is pretty much how it went, okay, in my book group, because as we were talking about sex and non-binary, gender, and intersex, I waved my hand and I said, I spent many years working on a sea slug that was a simultaneous hermaphrodite. And it was like, that was it. We didn't talk about the book anymore. It was all about the sex life of the hermaphroditic sea slug. So one thing led to another. One of the members of our book group works for the Ann Arbor District Library. I had never heard of Nerd Nite. I'm thrilled to have gone to some of the events and to be here to give a presentation. And as I said, one thing led to another, and here I am. So thank you so much, Emily and Sarah, for inviting me. Here it is, folks. This is the lovely Aplysia californica, also known as a sea slug or a sea hare, because somebody thought that this looked like a bunny, all right? Here are the little ears, here's the fat butt, and they thought it was very cute, like a bunny. Where do you think Aplysia californica lives? Off the coast of California. That's right. So from actually northern Mexico right up to Morro Bay, right, which is somewhere around San Francisco. They look like a hunk of liver, and they are slimy, and I love them. Now, many of you know that we no longer talk about hermaphrodites. We have changed our vocabulary about so many things having to do with sex and gender. With mammals now, including humans, we talk about intersex, but when it comes to sea slugs, they're still hermaphrodites. It's just the way it is. So I wanted to show you a drawing of the anatomy, some of the important parts of the gross anatomy of a sea slug. And there's a lot of things here, but what's circled in red are the simultaneous bits where it's male and female at the same time. So we'll start at the tail. So here's the tail, here's the head. Those are the bunny ears up there. They have a distributed central nervous system, so they don't have a brain per se. Their nervous system's all over the place. They have an ovotestis, both tissues. It's amazing, and it's integrated. There's not like a half is an ovary and half is a testis, right? It's an ovotestis, and the cells are kind of mixed together. They produce eggs and sperm at the same time. Where does that go? It travels up a shared duct system to something called a gonopore, which is both a male and a female structure. So for the female part, it's like a vagina. All right, so this is back here, all right, is where the gonopore is, and that is where it accepts the penis. Okay, it's also where sperm and eggs will get extruded from and travel up this dotted line, okay, the genital groove, to the mouth, the neck, where the penis is. Where the penis is. The penis is like here. All right. So the very first time I started working with Aplysia californica in Los Angeles at UCLA, I built very elaborate tank systems to house them with seawater that came from off the coast, and it was all beautiful and wonderful. And I knew about their behavior, but seeing is believing. So what is going on here? It's an orgy off the coast of California. This kind of thing is not allowed in Michigan, but it's perfectly legal in California. So we have here 3 different Aplysia. And this pointer doesn't work, but you can see here that we have one blob here that's an Aplysia, and it's accepting the penis from this middle one. So she is now acting as a female. Sorry? Okay. All right. I'm not moving anywhere yet though, but I'll do that. Okay. No, don't worry about it. This one, whose penis is in the neck, okay, is acting as a male to the one in the middle. Whoops. Sorry. Okay, this one is both. It's acting as a male to this one and a female to that one. At this point, I want to welcome the West Side Book Club interpretive dancers up front. Yes. All right, we have only practiced this one time, so this could be total chaos. All right, so what is happening is I'm going to form a circle here so that it's a daisy chain of copulating sea slugs with no start and no end. All right. I will go through this again, but we are off the coast of California. We are mating, and this goes on for hours, hours, day after day after day. Right. It goes on for an entire breeding season, which is in the summer. They do it once a day, and then, like salmon, they die. Okay, so what are the sequence of events? So the warm water of summer and also into early fall, because there's a bit of a delay, activates a group of brain cells called bag cell neurons. Not very imaginative name. They're called bag cell neurons because they look like a bag of cells. Those bag cell neurons secrete a protein hormone called egg-laying hormone. Again, not very imaginative. It stimulates egg laying. And you can see here a mass of eggs. Do you see that? These are just a frenzy of copulating slugs. They are laying eggs, they're copulating, they are doing their thing. What's interesting is that outside of the breeding season, these slugs are solitary. But the first one to lay the eggs, those eggs, which are not fertilized, they have pheromones attached to them. They get released in the water. Again, not a very imaginatively named pheromone. It's called attractin. It does what the name suggests. It attracts other slugs of the same species to come in. 36 species around the world of Aplysia. This is Aplysia californica. More sea slugs come, and they formulate a copulating daisy chain or daisy ring. Now, what did I study? You actually can't get any money from the NIH, the National Institute of Health, to study hermaphroditic sex behavior. What you can get money for is to study the cellular mechanisms linking electrical activation of bag cell neurons and egg-laying hormone synthesis and secretion. All right, yes, but I was still interested in sex, so I would do that on the side. Okay. You know, borrow from Peter to pay Paul type of thing. So I was really, in essence, studying the first two bits of this sequence. Why study sea slugs? Well, at the time, the types of questions that I was asking about activation, electrical activation of neurons that control reproduction couldn't be done in a vertebrate. And I had developed the sea slug as the perfect animal model for trying to understand what was happening at the cellular level, because it's all pretty much the same, no matter what neuron you're talking about. The mechanisms are very, very similar. The devil is in the details. So, what's the beauty of any invertebrate? They have giant neurons. How giant? You can see them with the naked eye. 0.05 to 1 millimeter in diameter. Here are the bag cell neuron clusters, here and here. I could see the individual cells with the naked eye. Not anymore because my eyesight is deteriorated with age, but they were really easy to study using electrophysiology and optical imaging and secretory types of biochemistry. It was really, really exciting. And I discovered all sorts of interesting things that had not been discovered before because I had the right animal model for it. So, early on in my research, and I need my notes here because I don't have any prompts. And this is a really weird story that I have not told publicly before. I don't think that my PhD advisor, Fred Karsh, can you raise your, okay. My PhD advisor, Fred Karsh, 1982 to 88. I don't think I ever told you this story, and you'll know why when I tell it. So once I got to UCLA, I very quickly started publishing my work with, aplesia. And my research was published in specialty journals such as endocrinology. This is one of my papers from 1994. It's a good journal, but it's a specialty journal. It's not Science or Neuron or something like that. And I got a call one day, and some guy wants to talk to me about my research. And there's some odd things about how the conversation was going. He clearly read my papers. Now, this was in the early to mid 90s, before PubMed, which is a search engine, became a thing. That meant you had to go to a biomedical library, dig into the stacks, and find these obscure papers. Right? Who does that unless you're working on this? So he started asking me questions about my tanks and if a human could fit in there. And I'm thinking, okay, this conversation is not going in a direction that I thought it would go. And I asked him, who are you? And he told me his name, which I've now forgotten, but what I've never forgotten is that he then introduced himself as the most prolific, most important porn producer in the San Fernando Valley. Porn producer. And I don't know if you are familiar with what goes on in the San Fernando Valley. It's adjacent to where UCLA is, but at that time, it was the premier production place in the world for pornography. So you've got Hollywood on one side, and you've got San Fernando Valley doing other things on the other side. And obviously all sorts of red flags are flying left and right. But I'm into this conversation, and he starts telling me about his vision for his next, big production. And it involves a daisy chain of copulating aplesia with a human hermaphrodite in the tank, and that he promised me it would be tastefully done. And he offered me money. All right. And now, okay, so you have to understand, I was a new assistant professor. I did not have tenure. I was in the medical school at UCLA, and the leadership in the medical school did not have any kind of sense of humor at all. And I'm watching not just my career, but my entire life flash before my eyes. And I shut down the conversation. But, a long time has passed between then and now. I feel comfortable talking about this story because I am retired. I don't really care anymore. I can make this public. And although I have to say, I keep looking every year, this paper from 1994 is still being cited in the literature, as are many of my other papers. So it's had a lasting impact, but I've always wondered about that film career that I did not pursue. And then, yeah, they can get pretty darn big. Any questions? Yes. Yeah, they do get the size. Those were too big for my tanks, so I did not use those. Yeah, but they do get that size. Yes. Okay, so he alluded to a hermaphrodite. It's very rare, okay, in humans. All right, so I guess he knew one. All right. And they would be just the one person, but artfully done. He was thinking about an art porn type of a, it wouldn't have been the worst thing for me to get involved with, but he did not offer me enough money. Yes. Woo! nwayne@g.ucla.edu. Yes. External, on the right side, always the right side. In fact, you can't see it on this one because of the position of the body, but it's very visible. You can see it. Yeah. So that's a great question. These simultaneous hermaphrodites do not self-fertilize. There are other species of Pelagia that do self-fertilize. Lack of money from federal granting agencies have not really permitted us to be asking some of these very basic questions about, interesting properties of interesting animals. They're not interested. The NIH and NSF, more so the NIH, I was in a medical school, all right? They weren't interested in interesting animals. They were interested in mice, rats, and humans. That was pretty much it. For a while, they were interested in sheep, which is what Fred's lab worked on, but that's pretty much gone by the wayside. Any other questions? Yes. That is such a great question. Yes, there is a protocol. You have to be the same species. So it's very interesting. And this is something that my Aplysia collector would tell me stories about. It was fascinating. I loved like the real world stories. What was really going out on the ocean out there? And what he'd tell me is that, okay, there's several different species of Aplysia that all live, in the same tide pools. And during the breeding season, they would all kind of congregate, but they never mix species. How do they know? They were clearly attracted to the attractant pheromone, right? How did they know? I mean, they don't have a visual system, right? How did they know that, Aplysia californica, okay, and Aplysia brasiliana, that they should not mix? So there's some sort of protocol, but we don't know what that is. Yes. Right. So what happens is that they live at most a year. That's it. So in each of these strands of eggs, there are millions of fertilized eggs. Most of them float away and die or are eaten. Okay, they are part of the plankton. If they can latch onto a rocky substrate, they've got a chance of growing and becoming a mature sea slug. All right. And then, I mean, they have to survive quite a lot. They live in the intertidal zone. So there's a wave action, which actually strengthens them, but can also kill them if they don't hang on. And so it's a rough life for our little sea bunny out there. And so there were seasons where we were seasonal in the work that we were doing, right? We could only get the mature sea slugs during the summer. What are we doing the rest of the time? Writing and reading and doing all that other fun stuff. So, and also because we were doing a lot of biochemistry, we would save the tissue samples and and the secretory samples. We would be doing research in the laboratory on that. So we really had to plot everything out very carefully on a seasonal basis. Yeah. Fred.
So, this is all fascinating and wonderful. I wonder if you could tell us what the most important single question you would like to answer that you haven't answered.
Wow. Okay, that's such a Fred question. So the single most important question that I did not get a chance to answer before this research project was shut down is I really wanted to know more about the relationship between egg-laying hormone synthesis and secretion. Okay, so what we did find was that with this daily stimulation of secretion of egg-laying hormone, they ran out after a while. What were the signals to replenish that releasable pool? Now, that would be the same for any cell that is secreting a lot of peptide or a lot of neurotransmitter. Okay, what is the signal and the relationship between synthesis and secretion? We started down that road, and then in NIH's infinite wisdom, they cut us off at the knees, and I had to turn to something else. So it does remain a question out there that other lab groups, there's a colleague of mine in Canada that is still getting funded for this work. So, oh, Canada, all right. But that's not going to be, that wasn't my lab that was able to do that. All right. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Nancy. Folks, if you have any more questions or even can think of another question about sea slugs, I think we should email the NIH and ask them the question so they know that people want to know, right? We should be funding this stuff. Good things here. All right. I would like to thank again all of our speakers tonight, Jennifer and Justin and Nancy. Thank you so much. Thank you again to Venue for hosting us here at this lovely venue. And we hope to see some of you again next month. We will be back at Live on First Street on Wednesday, May 10th. We are lining up a great set of speakers. You will be learning about fruit flies. You will be learning about creative reuse. You might be hearing about the one-armed man who went to the Grand Canyon, but we'll see. And we hope that you will join us. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you and good night.